Of things that you might find of interest. First, about this room, particularly those who are in the generation following World War II will remember this room particularly, because the Kennedy Caucus room is very famous. Other than the Senate and House chamber, it's the most famous room on Capitol Hill. The inquiry into the sinking of the Titanic was here. I remember, as a very young child, the Army McCarthy hearings were in here. The labor racketeering hearings with Jimmy Hoffa testifying. Some of you may remember Bill Fulbright's hearings on the Vietnam War occurred in here. Sam Ervin's Watergate hearings occurred as well. And now that I mentioned Sam Ervin, I've got to tell you a funny story. Our national commander was a page boy in the United States Senate over in the Capitol building. First time I met him, very young child, as a page. Although I told Anthony that, you know, you can tell we're both getting old in that both of us knew all three people after whom these buildings are named, both Russell, Hart, and Dirksen. But Sam Ervin, who chaired those Watergate hearings, had a nervous tic, and those of you who may remember, his eyebrows would go up and down like this all the time. And Anthony was a page boy, and Senator Ervin happened to look over toward Anthony. Anthony jumped over and ran to him and said, what do you want, Senator? Nothing at all. But the reason this room was named the Kennedy Caucus Room, well, I left off the Iran-Contra hearings were also mentioned here, and the Clarence Thomas Supreme Court nomination activities occurred in this room. And the reason it's named the Kennedy Caucus Room is because it's named after the three brothers, all who served as United States Senators, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Teddy Kennedy. John Kennedy announced his presidential announcement in this room. When you see it on television, any of the old films, you'll see those wooden background behind the people sitting at the dais conducting these hearings. A little thing also about the Capitol that you might find of interest, that the United States Capitol dome was modeled after Christian cathedrals. It was modeled after the Pantheon in Paris, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. Interestingly also, both House and Senate chambers have a chaplain who opens every session of every day with a prayer. As well, when the Capitol was first being built, and Washington was not a large city that contained many things, church services Sunday mornings were held in the United States Capitol building for many, many years. Now, if I might just mention one more thing about the strange way policy is developed in Washington. And this is because, although a senator and member may sound as though he really understands our issue and he's right on top of it, and he may appear that way on all the issues, you need to understand that anytime somebody speaks to us, they've been briefed in detail about what we are interested in. And in fact, to get a senator or member of Congress to focus on your issue is a very difficult thing. And let me just give you one statistic that makes it clear why that's the case. Today, with email and fax and letters, the average member of the House of Representatives receives how many written communications a week? 5,000. The average United States senator receives 25,000 written communications a week. And when we did our survey and we asked the chiefs of staff, roughly how many do they read? The answer was 2 a day of the documents. So it's very hard to get them to focus on your issue. And this is one of the reasons that we've been talking about one of the great problems that our issues have, is that they're seen in Washington, D.C., not only because it's the Eastern Church, they're not familiar with it, not only because all the Christians they knew seem to be treated very well, but all of our issues to them appear to be an incident that happened in that country and over here in this other country. there was an incident. I wonder what was involved in that incident. They do not see this as a phenomenon. And so one of the very important accomplishments of this conference will be to help Washington policymakers understand the gravity of this horrific phenomenon. You can see it in little keywords that are used. One, that for those of you that are old enough to remember before the term anti-Semitism became big, that sometimes was seen as distinct incidents. But once that term came around, if a swastika is painted on a synagogue in Cheyenne, Wyoming, everybody sees it immediately. Oh, there's anti-Semitism again. The masterpiece of terms that have mislead or that make an issue suddenly a very viable issue is Islamophobia. You probably all saw in the news after the election of President Trump, a young woman on a college campus was dressed up in her garb, and some people started yelling Trump, 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 and spit on her, and it was all over the national news. Islamophobia had really been. Well, in fact, that never even happened. But that term has everybody so ready to accept what it means that it was accepted by the media. If we can do the same thing, and nobody has been able yet to come up with the term, but the phenomenon could be, as somebody said today, in many ways, Christian extinction. Because think about this. Name for me a Muslim majority country where the indigenous Christians are not moving toward extinction. In Turkey, that we're familiar with, there were between 40% and 20% Christians at the turn of the century, and today there's less than 1/4%. And also, the converse is interesting. Name the Christian countries where Muslims are moving toward extinction. I have heard of none. But this is really not understood here on Capitol Hill. Somebody else mentioned the endangered Christians, or another one was like acrophobia or whatever that might be, or patricide, Christianicide. But if we can come up with a term that describes what Christians are facing in this world, it will contribute tremendously to our ability to get policymakers to understand it. Because now, when they see an incident, they want to know the details. Well, what caused it? Well, who was at fault here? But once a term is accepted that we're all using, and it's just a matter of the amount of time it is used, we will immediately have a knee-jerk reaction coming to our aid. So since the Senator and Congressman Smith will not be here for a while, we'll have an opportunity to eat our salads, and when they arrive, we will be back at the microphone. Thank you. If I could have your attention for just a moment, I would like to ask the National Commander, Dr. Anthony Limbarakis, to please come up for very brief words before we hear from Congressman Chris Smith.
Your Eminence, Archbishop Demetrius, Exarch of Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Your Eminence, Your Eminences, Your Excellencies, Congressman Smith, distinguished guests, brother Archons, ladies and gentlemen. As we gather here in this most magnificent setting of the Capitol complex, the Kennedy Caucus Room, my mind travels in time back to October 21, 1997, and another magnificent setting, the Capitol Rotunda, and the bestowal of the Congressional Gold Medal to His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. At that time, the United States Congress honored the Ecumenical Patriarch as, quote, the apostle of love, peace, and hope. Nothing could be more true. Yes, and that is why we have gathered here today, to bring hope to those who live without hope, to foster peace in places of war and violence, and to do all with love, which is the beginning and the end of all things. On behalf of the Archons of the Great Church of Christ, please accept our deepest thanks for your presence and your participation these days. Thank you so very much.
I'd like to call to the microphone now an individual who's played a very important role for our church, for our faith, and for our ecumenical patriarch. In terms of legislation introduced, he's number 2 in the entire House of Representatives of 435 members. And although he looks like a very young man to me, he's number 5 in seniority, plays an extremely important role on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And you should know that before people up here really understood Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, when the Archons began their first effort on Capitol Hill, the person who chaired the issue was the chairman of the Helsinki Commission at the time, and since then, as you know, the Oval Office and Congress understands full well who the Ecumenical Patriarch is, and we appreciate him greatly. From New Jersey, Congressman Chris Smith.
Andrew, thank you. First, let me say how grateful I am to be here. Andrew and I go back decades in working on issues of religious freedom. Thank you for that. And Mike Manitos as well, chairman of the event. Of course, Dr. Limirakis, thank you for your leadership. And of course, His Holiness, or I should say Archbishop Demetrius, thank you for your leadership. And so many here who have done so much for so many for so long. Thank you for that. Let me just say, I'll be brief. I learned a lesson very recently. I chair the Lyme disease caucus. It's an issue that is very endemic to my area of the country. And they had 1,000 people at a big gathering right here in Washington. And they said, "You're going to be the keynote?" I said, "Thank you. How long do I have?" They said, "An hour." I took an hour and 5 minutes. It was an hour too long. At the end of it, this little girl came up. There were a lot of families there. And she said, "Mister, your speech was long and boring." A minute later, she walked out. She was about 4, and her father said, "I saw you talking to my little daughter, Melissa. I want you to know she's at the awkward age where she just repeats whatever she hears." So thank you again for inviting me to be here, and for the Order of St. Andrew for so effectively advocating for the protection and the preservation of Christians and Christianity in the Middle East and in the Holy Land, of course, where it all began. More than ever before, vigorous U.S. leadership and diplomacy are needed to address religious freedom violations in the region and globally. All the tools embedded in laws like the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, which I authored last year in honor of our great champion, Frank Wolf, my colleague, who did the original International Religious Freedom Act in 1998. All of the tools are embedded in our current law, and they just need to be implemented, including timely and faithful implementation of country of particular concern. I held a number of hearings during the previous administration saying, "Where's the CPC designations? Where are they?" Nowhere to be found. Ambassador Saperstein, David Saperstein, who did a wonderful job, but he was like a lone voice in the previous administration when it came to religious freedom. The many out of sanctions on CPC countries, including not just the country, but individuals. That's in the new bill, the new law. And that includes saying no visa. So in Turkey, where there's gross violations of human rights and persecution, individuals can be held accountable pursuant to our new Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act. And they must be. We also have enhanced religious freedom training for our foreign service officers to ensure that they get it, So often that naivete can be disastrous when they're deployed to a country, and frankly, very smart people, but may not have a clue about the nuances and about the importance of religious freedom. And then the integration of religious freedom in every aspect of U.S. foreign policy. Not a stovepipe somewhere where you have one person speaking and no one else in that chain of command. The new law requires a whole-of-government integration of religious freedom into our foreign policy. I have to tell you, the Trump administration has made clear that they are committed to implementing the new law and assisting persecuted Christians. The pending confirmation of Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, Governor Sam Brownback, who has the knowledge, the passion, and the gravitas to lead effectively, and our Vice President, Mike Pence, who's articulate and tenacious, was so when he was in the House, continued that as governor, and now he too is in a position where he can make all the difference. He will be embarking on a trip to the region, including Egypt, very, very shortly. In the past, I have been in places where human rights trips, where human rights of Christians and others have been trashed and severely violated. From the Soviet Union, my first trip in 1992 as a new member of Congress on behalf of Soviet Jews and Orthodox Christians, to Warsaw Pact countries, to Turkey, to China, to places in Africa like Jos, Nigeria, where Boko Haram savages Christians and burns churches to the ground. I've also been to places like Vietnam, and of course, most recently, not of course, but recently, my top staffers and I last Christmas went to Erbil, where Christians had been escaping to escape ISIS genocide. We went at the invitation of Archbishop Bashir Warda, the Chaldean Catholic Archbishop of Erbil, and frankly, I just met him again yesterday, perhaps some of you as well, and he continues to press that the United States and the United Nations help. The Archbishop's message yesterday was urgency, urgency, and more urgency. Shockingly, for years, the U.S. did not provide so much as a dime to help his efforts to help some 70,000, and the number is lower now, of Christians who had escaped ISIS. I was bewildered by that. I held 9 congressional hearings to probe and say, why are we not helping? And got back very, very poor answers. Finally, I introduced a bill that I think will make a difference. It's called the Iraq and Syria Genocide Emergency Relief and Accountability Act. You have a copy of it in the folder we've handed out. I introduced it in September of last year. We got it out of the House in June. It passed. It's bipartisan, as it ought to be. And yet it has sat here for almost 7 months, languishing in the U.S. Senate. And I have to tell you, again, talking to Archbishop Warda yesterday, it is unconscionable that that bill has not gone onto the president's desk. President Trump has said he will sign it, and he will sign it immediately. Even when we were in Erbil, the consulate, very, very civil person, good person, said you can't go to the IDP camp where 6,000 Christians were living. It was 10 minutes away from our consulate in Erbil. I went anyway with my staff, with Archbishop Warda, and we met with all of these wonderful Christians who had stories of ISIS atrocities, and yet they continued to radiate Christ in a way that just showed the power of the gospel and the resiliency of their own spirits. I came back, as did my staff, even more determined to make sure that the United States was part of the solution, again, what you are focusing on, and this bill will provide solutions. You know, in the past, we've had such great people like His Grace Angeas from the UK testified at our hearings about how horrifically Coptic Christians are treated, a little better under al-Sisi, but certainly real problems, including the abduction of Christian girls, Coptic Christian girls, who are forced into Islamic marriages, and as the author of our trafficking laws, trafficking these young girls into these forced conversions, where they are then, unfortunately, very difficult for them to go back. Let me just finally say, and I appeal to you today, to ask Chairman Corker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who has a hold on our bill. And this may sound impolite, but I am tired of the wait, because the wait is hurting individual Christians. Again, Archbishop Werda couldn't have been clearer yesterday. We need help. Had it not been for the Christian charities that rose to the occasion, went deep into their pockets and provided over $40 million of emergency aid, we would have had dead children and women and fragile elderly as a result of it. Now the winter is approaching in Iraq and in Erbil, and they need help, and they want to obviously be repatriated with their old homes and rebuild. We need to be a part of that process. Archbishop Werda said, we're at a tipping point, and I conclude on this. He said, what becomes of these remaining Christians will be decided based on what actions the world takes now. And I say actions because there is no time left for words. Truly, these coming months may well decide the fate of Christianity in Iraq, whether it survives and is given a chance for rebirth, or whether it perishes, existing only in a few scattered museum pieces with caretaker clergy of interest to tourists and academics, perhaps, but without the Christian people who had lived there for 2,000 years. This conference comes at a critical time. We can make the difference. Washington can make the difference. You have already made the difference. And again, I want to salute you for your faith. It is inspiring, but also knowing that we need to do tangible deeds. As it says, faith without works is dead. We are lacking in the works. Thank you.
We have a plaque that Dr. Limbarakis would like to give to Chris. Yeah,
with His Eminence the Archbishop.
Oh, Your Eminence.
Step back.
The Third Archon International Conference on Religious Freedom, in gratitude to Congressman Chris Smith for his extraordinary commitment to religious freedom and for his advocacy for the Christians of the Holy Lands and Middle East. Washington, D.C., December.
Thank you. Congratulations.
I'll introduce him for 30 seconds after you speak.
Well, mine will be We understand the senator is here now, Senator Ben Cardin, ranking member of the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a distinguished senator from the great state of Maryland, and we know our tradition in Maryland with Senator Paul Sarbanes. And I must say, your distinguished service to our beloved nation, fighting for religious freedom and human rights. Senator Cardin, on behalf of the Archons of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in America and the Archbishop, we welcome you to our luncheon.
If I might mention to the Senator, this whole conference has been focused on the plight of the phenomenon that is hitting Christians around the world, but particularly in the Middle East and in the Holy Lands. Literally, no one can think of a Muslim country that does not have its Christian population headed for extinction. And our State Department listed Christians as the most persecuted religion of the more countries they are persecuted than any other religion in the world. 60 countries they're being persecuted. But by way of introducing Senator Cardin, he's, as you know, the ranking minority member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, extremely important position. But the things that he has done, I will just mention two of them for our community. As you know, there's an effort to convert Hagia Sophia to a mosque. Senator Cardin worked with us for month after month after month in an effort to try to raise this issue very high on the national agenda. And the only way you can do that one of the most effective ways, is to get the chairman and ranking minority member of both the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee to sign that letter. We worked for months and were unable to, in the end, get the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to do it. But the other thing he's done that I've never seen any other senator or member of Congress do, in Cyprus, 500 churches were desecrated. In the cemeteries, crosses were just snapped off of people's graves. Our government was effectively hiding this from any congressional delegation that went there. As co-chairman of the Helsinki Commission, he took it upon himself to send a delegation there to investigate this issue, return, and report to the Congress of the United States about this travesty against Christianity. I've never heard of another senator or member of Congress do that. He's been our friend for a very long time, and we appreciate him being with us today. The ranking minority member, Senator Ben Cardin.
Andy, thank you.
Andy Manatos, thank you very much for your extraordinary leadership here on so many important issues, and we appreciate that. You are well represented here on Capitol Hill. It's good to be here with my colleague Chris Smith. I thank him for his leadership on the Helsinki Commission. We've worked together for many, many years on these issues. Andy mentioned Cyprus. That's been one of our priorities on the Helsinki Commission, and it has been bipartisan, nonpartisan, to protect the cultural heritage of the Greek Cypriots that was under attack. So I appreciate you mentioning that, Andy. We've also worked together to protect the religious protections within Turkey, which has been a constant struggle. We recognize that, and I thank you all for what you do with the St. Andrew's Society and the Archons, and your work that you do on behalf of religious tolerance. Let me just make a couple observations. On December 10th, we will celebrate International Human Rights Day. 69th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I'll call you all to really read that document, because it's a brilliant document about what we stand for as global citizens and what is our obligation to protect. And religious freedom is one of the major tenets of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where we came together as an international community. Now, in the Helsinki, the OSCE, we have formalized that with a document that says that it is our right to challenge any other country's violations of the basic tenets of the OSCE. So those who say that we're meddling, we are not. We're speaking up for universal values. And you're right to raise these issues today, when we have over 60 million people who are refugees, many of whom who have had to leave their country because of their religious beliefs. As we are having lunch here today, 1 million Rohingya Muslims have had to leave their homes in Burma because of their religious beliefs and are trying to find shelter in Bangladesh. This is happening today. And you're right to put a spotlight on the persecution of Christians. We have seen ISIS, we have seen Boko Haram, and other groups that are targeting Christians because they are different than what they espouse as the only legitimate religion of their community. It's a direct violation of just about every principle of international standards in human rights and religious freedom. And we have to speak out against it in a unified way. It was Elie Wiesel, one of the great human rights leaders, survivor of the Holocaust, who said that when any of us are in jeopardy, we're all in jeopardy. When any religious minority is attacked, we are all attacked. And if we're silent, we are complicitous. If we don't speak out, we help the perpetrators. When we don't take action, we condone that activity. We must be active participants. And the United States needs to be the leader on this issue, because I must tell you, I've met with many leaders from other parts of the world, and Chris has done the same, and they want to help, but they say that U.S. leadership is critically important if we're going to be able to make progress globally. If the United States sits on the sidelines, it makes it much more challenging for us, other countries, to do what is right. So we have to act to protect religious minorities. And yes, you are right to concentrate on the persecution of Christians anywhere in the world, but particularly what we're seeing in the Middle East and Northern Africa. That's unacceptable. Cannot happen under our watch. And yes, Chris Smith is right. There's got to be accountability. I remember growing up and hearing "never again," only to see it happen again and again and again. We must hold those responsible for these atrocities accountable. They must be faced with justice. That must happen. So I am pleased to be Congressman Smith's partner on the Syrian accountability. I've introduced legislation in the Senate, which is moving. We need to make it clear that Assad does not get a pass. Those who are committing atrocities do not get a pass. That we're going to hold accountable so we don't see this conduct occur in the future. There's another bill I called to your attention. It's named after Elie Wiesel, the Atrocities Prevention. What we find is that when you let go unchecked violations of religious tolerance, that it leads to other types of activities. It leads to corruption. It leads to violence. It leads to terrorism. And yes, it does lead to ethnic cleansing and genocide. And you need to take action to prevent this type of activity. So we have bipartisan legislation that's moving through the Congress for the State Department to identify the seeds of atrocities and to act on it before they become full-blown ethnic cleansing and genocide. We can do a lot better. So I wanted to come by today to thank you for always being there. I want you to know that we have to be united. We have groups that are working very effectively to stop anti-Semitism wherever we find it. And the Helsinki Commission has been in the forefront of those efforts. And Chris Smith and Ben Cardin have been in the forefront of those efforts. And we have groups that are fighting the anti-Muslim actions that have taken place. And the Helsinki Commission's been in the forefront, and we're working on that. My point is, we need to be united. Any of us that are attacked because of our religious beliefs, we all are less safe. So you have my commitment. I'm going to do everything in my power to protect the Christian minorities in the Middle East and elsewhere that are under persecution today. I have a responsibility to do that as an American, as a global citizen, and as a member of the United States Senate that has the power to do something about that. And you have my pledge that I will. And I'm going to work with our brothers and sisters to promote religious freedom globally so that wherever you live and might be in a minority, and you're practicing your faith, you know that we in the global community will protect your rights to practice your religion without intimidation or fear from your government. That's my pledge. That needs to be our pledge. So I know this has been, I think you've been here for a full day. You have seminars during the daytime too. You're really getting into the details. And that's refreshing here on Capitol Hill. So we appreciate your commitment to this issue, and we want you to know that you have friends on both the Democratic and Republican side, both the House and the Senate, the Congress and the White House, that want to join you to make sure that we protect people who only simply want to be able to practice their religion in peace and safety. Our mission is to make sure that's a reality. God bless, and thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Cardin. I have to say, before we present this recognition, that the Archons know too well Elie Wiesel, of blessed memory, who received the Archon's highest honor with the Athenagoras Human Rights Award. We know so well the OSCE and the Human Dimension meetings every year because we send a delegation there. And we know too well the CPC designation of USERF because we go to them very often. So Senator Cardin, it is our great honor to bestow and present to you this plaque for your extraordinary commitment to religious freedom and for the advocacy for the Christians of the Holy Lands and Middle East. Senator Cardin, God bless you. Senator. Put the senator in the middle.
Chris, if you could come up as well, that would be great.
Yes,
hey Chris, how are you?
Good to see you. Yeah, come on. Let's have a nice...
Oh, I had lefties anyway.
I looked to see if they were two. I was going to take them.
They're not that good. They were about three. Maybe four.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, we're well aware of those who, remember, any one senator can stop.
Oh, I know. Thanks, Ben.
Right.
Good remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please continue your meal. They'll be serving dessert and coffee. At 12:30, we'll have a benediction, and we'll walk you over to the next panel. Thank you.